back, YouTube and the internet. This is Nathan Quinn, and this is episode 6, where I will discuss assumptions versus reality as far as seeking help for cognitive injuries. I'm going to preface this again by saying that I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a medical provider or an expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm just a dude sharing his experiences with you all. So diving right in, this episode is going to tailor more so towards folks in the military, just because, again, that was my experience, and a lot of my assumptions and then concerns with seeking help related specifically to life in the military or even life outside of the military, using that same framework to apply that to, law enforcement or other things. That said, there are still some things in this episode, I think, that even if you are not in the military yourself and you're experiencing some of these concerns, I encourage you to listen, because maybe some of these reality experiences, or these experiences in real life, I guess I should say, might alleviate some of those hesitations you might have. So the first one that I had was that, my command wouldn't support me. And the reality was that from, Congress down to the Department of Defense, down to each respective branch, that, again, using their terminology, mental health or behavioral health is a priority. And so there are command directives to encourage people to seek help, to not punish them for seeking help, to give them full access to whatever resources they need. And saying all that to say that your respective command teams have been told by, echelons above their pay grade that, hey, this is a priority. You need to take care of this and you need to treat it seriously. So my experience was awesome, right? Every level of my command team was fully supportive. They, from the AOB, my company commander, so the O4 and the E8, his counterpart, E9, they were very supportive of me, got me the help I needed. Battalion command team, the O5 and his enlisted counterpart, again, very supportive, all the way up to group headquarters at third group, very supportive, right? Nobody made any assumptions about what I was going through. Nobody belittled me or made me feel less than or anything like that. Everybody was super supportive. That said, not all command teams are equal. So there is a story out there many years ago, not many, maybe 5 years ago-ish, of a Green Beret who had a very different experience. I don't know the full scope of the details behind what happened, as far as his own experiences, what sequence of events led ultimately to this outcome. But the outcome, from what I understand from the video that he published on various social media platforms, was that his command team was less supportive. In fact, if I recall correctly, they, made life very difficult for him, tried to chapter him. And so the optics became that he was being punished for seeking help. Again, I don't have a whole lot of context as far as, were there other circumstances surrounding that situation that led them being that command team to go with that course of action? I don't know. All I'm saying is illustrating two very different experiences, so his experience and my experience, to highlight that no two command teams are the same. And so, experiences may vary. Again, reiterating that this is a directive from Congress and from the Department of Defense to make this a priority and to not do, what happened with this guy. So that was my first assumption and my first real world experience. The second one was that, if I go get help, I'm going to be disciplined, right? I'm going to be reprimanded. I'm going to get removed from my unit. Or, if I'm on a team, if I'm a team guy, right, I'm going to get taken off the team. Or if I'm in a leadership position, I'm going to get removed from that leadership position. And the reality is that seeking help does not automatically result in you getting removed from your unit or from a leadership position. That is certainly a potential outcome, right? And the reoccurring theme with a lot of these assumptions is that there is a modicum of truth to some of those concerns. However, none of these assumptions are foregone conclusions, right? It's not if then, if I seek help, then this will happen. No, that could happen. That doesn't mean it will happen, right? If you get pulled from your team, if you get pulled from your leadership position, that is more than likely a result of a conversation that occurred between you, your healthcare providers, and your senior command team, right? Say, hey, does this person need to focus or have do they need more bandwidth to focus on their recovery, right? And the decision to pull you from those positions is not punitive in nature. It is to remove other distractions so that you can focus on your recovery, right? It's the same thing, again, going back to the analogy of like a physical injury, right? If you are injured physically, right, you get put on profile, again, using the military as an example, right, in the Army, you get put on a profile saying, hey, you have a stress fracture, right? We are going to limit your exposure to stimulus that would, exacerbate that injury or prolong your recovery, right? We want to expedite your recovery as much as possible so that you can get back to the fight as quickly as possible, right? Will a stress fracture heal over time if you continue to run on it lightly? Maybe, possibly. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but I can tell you it'll probably heal a lot faster if you don't run on it and if you take a break from it and let it heal. And so applying that same perspective to getting pulled temporarily off a team or a leadership position, I think is very helpful, right? And for me, the decision to pull me from the team didn't occur until, a few weeks after I got home. There was a discussion of, hey, is Nate still going to be the detachment commander? Is he going to come back home, or is he going to come back to the deployment after getting whatever he needs? But, temporarily I was removed and sent home so that we could make that assessment. And then ultimately the decision was made, again, after a conversation between myself, the provider, and the command team, that, hey, you know what? Nate needs to focus on this. He could he get help and improve while still in the chair? Probably, maybe. Is it going to be better for him and faster for him and easier for him to get his recovery and his rehab not in the chair? Yes, right? So it was not causal. It wasn't, I was taken off of my team because I got help, right? And so there is no hard and fast, like if I go get cognitive help, I'm going to get removed from my ODA or my platoon or whatever. Like that could happen. Depends on your injury, right? If it's severe enough, then hey, maybe we need to get you in a position where you can focus on exclusively that so that we can expedite your recovery and get you back to 100%. The other perspective I would encourage guys to look at, especially if you are on a team, right? If you're a team guy specifically, right? We owe it to the organization to be at 100%, right? So if you're a team guy and you are not at 100%, is the rest of the ODA going to pick up the slack? Obviously, right? But should you maybe have the wherewithal to go, hey, you know what? Right now, I am hurting the organization because I'm not up to 100%. So let me go get to 100% so that I can actually contribute and the team doesn't have to pick up my slack. So I'm not a liability. And I'm not trying to paint that in a negative connotation, just the perspective of an ODA guy, like, hey man, we all have a role to play and we all have jobs to do. And if you can't do your job, the team will pick up the slack, but now you are forcing them to divert time, effort, and energy away from doing their jobs as efficiently because you are still trying to do your job, but you're operating at less than 100%, if that makes sense. So, is it better for the team ultimately if you take a knee, catch your breath, get some help, and then once you're at 100%, come back? I would imagine that the answer is probably yes for most guys. So yeah, the next big one is the next big assumption was that if I go get help, I'm going to lose my security clearance, right? So a lot of folks in the military have security clearances. I did. I'm sure this concern probably extends to folks in law enforcement, right? If you are in a federal entity and you have a security clearance, like, hey, if I go get help, if I go get put on medication, am I going to get pulled off or am I going to get my security clearance revoked, or am I going to get is it going to be paused, right? And again, that was not my experience, right? In fact, at least within the Army, the SF-86, and I'll put it up there, was adjusted to reflect that, to accommodate for folks trying to seek cognitive help. Okay, so you can see the verbiage there where it explicitly says that, being on medication or getting treatment by itself, in and of itself, is not a disqualifier for your clearance, right? So not only did I not lose my security clearance, nor was it ever paused, at least to my knowledge, right? It was actually reciprocated later on by 2 different federal agencies that I applied to. And from what I understand, and again, if you're reading the SF-86 thing, what they're really looking for is, the issue again isn't so much being on a medication or getting treatment or having a cognitive injury period, right? It's, hey, does this person still display good decision making and sound judgment, right? The decision to go get help, that immediately displays, all right, hey, this person still has some sound judgment. They're still making good decisions. If you choose to self-medicate through other medications or alcohol, now we might be tripping into, hey, okay, was that a good decision? Was that sound judgment? Maybe, maybe not. Not a medical provider. But again, from what I understand, the concern with the security clearance is, hey, does this person still make good decisions? Do we trust their judgment to not spill classified information in one way, shape, or form? Okay, so again, specific to the Army, the SF-86 was adjusted to accommodate seeking help, because I know a lot of guys, myself included, are like, hey man, if I go get help, am I going to get my security clearance revoked, right? And for me, that was critical because in my role as an 18 Alpha, I have to have a certain clearance. And so for me to say, hey, you know what? I am worried that if I do this, if I go get help, I'm going to get my clearance revoked, which means I can no longer be a Green Beret or a Special Forces officer. So that was a significant concern for me. And ultimately I ended up making a good decision, and I never lost my security clearance, and it's still active. So, is there a potential that you could get that clearance paused or revoked? Yes, that's a very real thing. But again, I think only if you start to display poor judgment or a history of making poor decisions, right? Getting help is a good decision. It's not a poor decision. Okay. So that was a big one for me. The next one that was a big one for me, and I think this one applies to, really any dude, not just in the Army or the military specifically, but, if I get help, I will get my guns taken away, right? That was a huge assumption for me and a huge concern because, professionally, I was an infantry officer and then I was a Green Beret. Access to firearms was part of the job, right? My job was to be not only proficient myself in the individual employment of my weapons, but, coordinating with my different maneuver elements to employ their weapon systems, teaching foreign partners how to use their weapon systems. Like, guns were a part of my identity. And so if I could not have access to firearms, I couldn't be a Green Beret, right? Like, hey, how can you do your job if you can't have a gun? You can't deploy anymore because if you go into a combat environment, you have to have a firearm. How can you do your job, right? Adding to that, compounding the issue was that, I had really started getting into competitive shooting. And so that was a significant part of me. And that was one of my hobbies. And so, hey, if I can't have access to firearms, if they take away my guns, I'm not going to be able to shoot competitively anymore. So I can't do my job. I can't do the thing that I enjoy. And I can't protect my family, right? So if I have firearms for self-defense purposes or home defense purposes, I can't protect my family anymore, right? And so those 3 factors were significant for me because, firearm access wasn't just, it was part of who I was, part of who I saw myself as, right? I saw myself as a warrior, as a war fighter. And so access to firearms was critical. And so that was a significant hurdle for me to overcome to getting help. And again, the reality was there was no if then, right? Hey, you got help, you lose access to your firearms, right? There is certainly a potential for that. But again, I think this goes back to my previous concern with a security clearance, where if you display sound judgment and good decision making, then that's not going to automatically result in you getting your firearms taken away, right? If you display that, hey, I am still in control, I am still, I'm still on the level, right? Everything is stable. Maybe there's not a need to take away your firearms. Now, I also made the decision on my own, simultaneously, unbeknownst to me, my wife also made the decision to move the guns out of my house because I wanted to make sure that everything was okay, that everything was stable, that everything was safe. And I wasn't sure what I was dealing with. So I was like, hey, out of an abundance of caution, let's get the guns out of the house, at least temporarily, right? Because at least then I have control of that, right? Like, I made the decision to move the guns out of the house, not somebody else. And I think, again, that displayed sound judgment and good decision making, because like, hey, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, you're worried about this, you're worried about self-harm, you're worried about suicide, like, you don't know what you're dealing with. Got it. That is a good decision. And even if that happens, right, even if, you make that decision or that decision is made for you by medical providers, like, hey, we think you need to limit your access to firearms for the time being, that there's probably a reason for that, because maybe your injury is so severe that, hey, we need to limit or reduce your access to firearms. And if that happens, that is not necessarily a permanent thing, right? Maybe it's temporary. Like, hey, we're going to limit your access to firearms until the provider feels, or you and the provider feel like, hey, it's safe to start clinically reintroducing exposure to firearms. And that's what I did, right? I started very small. Like, I think I went and borrowed somebody else's gun, when I went down to visit my parents down in Florida, I had them take me to the range with some of my old guns just to shoot. It's like, they still retained control of them. They still, like, kept them locked up in a safe. They maintained the weapons themselves, like, to and from the range. And they were there with me, so I wasn't by myself. But because I was dealing with so many intrusive thoughts, and I was still working through how to process those, I was like, hey, I don't want to do this by myself, right? I want somebody to be here with me in case, something crazy happens. You bastards. Right. I gradually worked up to the point where, hey, okay, now I have full access to my firearms again. I still shoot competitively. That it worked its way back up to where, okay, hey, I have them back. And again, that was a decision that I made with the provider, with my wife. And we sat down, we talked, and we're like, hey, this is how do we feel? Right. Okay. So again, that's not a hard and fast, if you go get help, you're going to get your guns taken away. Okay. Yeah. The next one that I think a lot of folks experience in the military is that if I go get help, I'm going to get chaptered out of the Army, right? I'm going to get kicked out. Again, not a hard and fast rule. Okay. I obviously was not chaptered out of the Army. I had already made the decision separately to leave the Army, but at no point was there any discussion of, hey, Nate, we're going to remove you from service because of you seeking help for this injury. If I had wanted to stick around and stay, I would have, and I could have, because I had, again, displayed that sound judgment and the good decision-making process, and I was still in control and I was still stable. When I was the rear detachment battalion commander with 101st, there were folks that we were chaptering out of the Army for cognitive health issues. All of those folks were inpatient, right? Meaning they were permanently living at the hospital under constant observation. They weren't just staying at home, going into a clinic every afternoon or every other afternoon to get help. These were folks that were under 24/7 surveillance. And again, it was a conversation between the patient, the provider, and us as the command team at the time, like, hey, what do we think is best for the patient? And if I recall correctly, every single one of these patients wanted to get out anyway, right? It wasn't like they were jonesing to stay in the Army and the Army was like, no, I'm sorry, son, we just can't have you anymore. It was like, hey, I want to get out, and also I have this going on, right? So in that circumstance, hey, okay, this makes sense. You want out. The provider doesn't think that the Army is probably the best continued course of action for you at this point. We're going to start the process. All right. And if that happens, that separation happens, it's not a punitive measure, right? It is not, we're not punishing you for seeking help. We are putting you in a position where, hey, you know what? The Army, maybe the Army is causing some of this. And maybe this isn't a good spot for you to be in, right? Like, why would we want to keep you in a position that is making this worse for you, right? Again, not a hard and a fast. I was not chaptered out because of seeking help. I can think of at least one other Green Beret who was getting help, who also was not chaptered. All right. He's still in. He's still doing good things. It's not an automatic thing. Okay. Could it happen? Yes. Again, that is probably going to be the case for our more severe case circumstances, which again is why I encourage folks to go ugly early, right? The earlier you go get help when the injury is not as severe, the less likely the outcome will be that, hey, we're going to have to separate you because this thing is at a catastrophic level and we just can't keep treating you in this environment in the Army because it is not conducive for your treatment, right? So again, it's not a hard and a fast rule for that. Second, another one that I really didn't think about or have concerns of. It just kind of happened, and it's something that after the fact I was like, oh shit, I didn't think about that. Life insurance, right? So if you are applying for life insurance on the civilian side and you have a history of this, it does create challenges, okay? So I applied for life insurance shortly after my diagnosis because also shortly after my diagnosis, we had our son. And so I was like, hey, I want to get some life insurance, some additional life insurance to cover our child in case something happens to both me and my wife, or like, something catastrophic, whatever. Not putting together like, hey, me applying for life insurance right after getting diagnosed with, major depressive disorder, probably not going to go over well. And it didn't. All the insurance companies are like, no, we're not going to do that. Especially once they found out like, hey, this dude's he's a soft guy and now he's got depression. No. So I emailed, or I responded back to one of them and I was like, hey, I understand why you guys are doing this. What can I do to improve the chances of getting approved in the future? And they were like, hey, just put some distance between you and this event. Again, display stability, display sound judgment, display that you are in control over a period of time, not like weeks after getting the diagnosis. And then it is more palatable to the insurance organization to say, okay, hey, this person has been stable for years. They've shown improvement for their cognitive injury. Not an issue, or less of an issue, less of a concern, right? So again, not a hard and a fast, but there is going to be some trouble with that. Now, that said, if you are getting out, right, you still have your SGLI if you're in, but if you're getting out, you do qualify for the VGLI, which is the Veterans Group Life Insurance, and you can't be denied for that. So, but you have to apply for that as you are transitioning, right? So if you get out, wait years, and then try to go apply for VGLI, you're probably going to run into some challenges. Okay. So they can't deny you for that. Right. So I applied for VGLI when I left active duty, not realizing at the time I couldn't have SGLI with the Guard and VGLI at the same time. I was being charged twice for the same thing, basically. So they're like, hey, you can't do VGLI while you're currently in. Do the Veterans Group Life Insurance when you leave National Guard time. Okay, cool. The next assumption that I had was that seeking help for cognitive injury would disqualify me from future endeavors in federal law enforcement, because that was where I decided, like, hey, this is what I want to go do after the Army. If I go get help, I'm not going to be able to get a job. Like, this in and of itself will disqualify me for these positions, right? Whether that was because I could no longer hold a security clearance, or because I could no longer have access to firearms, or just simply like, hey, we just don't take people that are on antidepressants or SSRIs or whatever. And that was a very real concern for me, right? My experience was quite the opposite. Again, having the benefit of submitting these applications, at least with one of them, like a year after seeking help, and, having a history of being stable and being in control. All that really happened with one agency, really both agencies, was they were like, hey, okay, like, we just have more questions from the medical side of the house. So, like, we just have some questions for your medical providers. One of them was straight up like, here's this questionnaire, give it to your medical provider, have them fill it out and send it back to us. And it was basically to the tune of, do you trust this person driving a car? Do you trust this person with access to firearms? Do you trust this person in a high stress environment? And at the time, I had resumed competitive shooting and had access to my guns again. So I just kind of laughed, because I was like, well, yeah, okay, I still drive. I still jump out of airplanes, stressful environments, check. I shoot competitively, so access to firearms, check. But they're doing their due diligence, and I expected them to do as much. Like, I would have questions too. So it makes sense. But that's all it was additional questions for the medical provider. Like, hey, in your professional opinion, do you think this person could do this job? With the second agency that I applied to, it was the same thing. A bit more in depth. And like, I had to get multiple forms filled out basically saying the same thing, but it was like, hey, okay, this does not automatically disqualify you. We just have more questions, which are, we're going to ask your provider, like, hey, do you think this person can do this job? Again, that's between you and your provider. That's not a hard and a fast, right? A lot of law enforcement agencies on their own, they're not just going to say, Matt, we're going to disqualify you, especially prior military. And as honestly, if we're being truthful with ourselves as a culture, like, as many people as have depression, like, they wouldn't hire anybody ever, because a lot of people these days are, have had experience with depression or anxiety. So if that was an immediate disqualifier, then they would never hire anybody, or very few people. So again, not a hard and a fast, like, if this, then that. The next one, the next assumption isn't, again, so much a hurdle as it was just understanding the process, right? And so it was, I'm going to go do therapy X number of times a week for X amount of time, and then I will improve, or everything will get better. And that's not realistic, right? What I didn't realize was that the work for the therapy is done at the points in time between your therapy sessions, right? Going and doing the therapy session with your therapist, with or whichever provider, that's not where the work is done. That's where you discuss the tools, right? Like, hey, this is what's going on. How do we work around that? And they can say, okay, here are some of the techniques to deal with that, right? Or you debrief them, right? That's what I would do towards the latter half of my therapy when I was still on active duty, was I would say, hey, this is what happened, right? I was experiencing this, then this happened. This is the technique I applied. This was the outcome. What do you think? Was it effective or was it not effective? And if it wasn't effective, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. What else could we do, right? But what I didn't realize was the work was done, the reps and the sets were done between therapy. Okay, so and if you think about it, really, if you are going and getting treatment for a cognitive injury, let's say you do 1 hour of therapy once a week, or like me, I did 1 hour of therapy 3 times a week. So 3 hours out of how many a week doing the work and expecting my condition or my injury to improve and heal which is 3 hours of treatment. Was that maybe a realistic expectation? At the time, I thought so. It wasn't, right? So the work that I realized, and I think a lot of people don't realize, is the work in therapy is done between your sessions. And unfortunately, a lot of that occurs by yourself, right? It's you you have to remember the techniques that you taught. And so one of the things I started doing was I started making notes in my iPhone, which everybody has heard go off now like 8 million times in the past 5 minutes, that, like, okay, if I forget certain techniques or processes or, procedures, I can go back and go, okay, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm going to try this, or I'm going to try that. Or like, I had a PACE plan, right? So in the military, or at least in the Army, we had our PAC, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. So steps, I guess, or techniques to try. So my primary technique is this. My alternate technique is this. My contingency technique is this. And if none of those work, then my emergency technique is this. So I had PACE plans for some of my issues, which I'll go into in future episodes. But that's where you had to do the work. All right. And that's how therapy works. Therapy on its own, the sessions are not designed to heal your injuries. You got to do them in between, right? So it's the same thing with physical injuries, right? You're doing physical therapy, right? You get usually what I would get is like little packets, right, with the exercises from the physical therapist. Like, hey, here's this exercise I want you to do, or here's these 8 exercises I want you to do. Every day you have to do, X number of sets times X number of reps of each of these exercises, right? Now you do some of those during physical therapy, and he or she is gonna check your injury and see like, okay, how you feeling? Can you bend this way, that, do this? Okay, let's try this. But if you don't do those exercises after your physical therapist gives them to you, then you're not going to heal as quickly. So it's the same thing with cognitive therapy. And again, so that wasn't so much a hurdle or something that prevented me from seeking treatment so much as a revelation. And then again, like just interacting with folks, talking to them about their own experiences, like, hey, this is what I thought was going to happen, and this is what actually happened. But yeah, so those were the primary assumptions, and then my actual experiences with them. And from what I understand in my own encounters with guys, my own conversations with guys, that's a lot of what stops guys from getting help. It was, am I going to get kicked off a team? Is my command team going to support me? Am I going to lose my security clearance? Am I going to lose access to firearms? Am I going to get kicked out of the Army? Am I going to be able to apply for, certain types of jobs after the fact? Those things are what prevented me from initially seeking help, right? And again, just reiterating, like, for all of them, there's a modicum of truth to some of those concerns, right? Those are possibilities. What they are not is, if this, then this. If I seek help, then this will happen. Not true. Maybe true, but it is not a hard and fast rule. It's a possibility. And again, I think that the earlier you go get help, the less likely those possibilities are to occur. And I'll end with this thought. So, all the things I was worried about, I remember sitting on my deployment, going over each of these concerns, like, well, if I go get help, then this could happen. But yeah, what if this happens? And then one day I remember thinking, like, well, it's all kind of moot, right? If I don't get help, or if I go get help, right? What does it matter if I don't get help, right? And my worst fears come to pass and I end up killing myself. Does it really matter if I don't have access to guns? I'll be dead. Why would it matter? If this gets so bad that would I really rather be dead than not be a Green Beret? Would I really rather be dead than not have a security clearance? Like, is not being here really preferable to those things? Like, don't get me wrong, the concerns were very real and very valid, but then when I placed it against life, it became kind of silly, right? It was like, well, okay, yeah, I guess not having access to firearms is kind of irrelevant if I'm not here. Like, why does it matter? Right? And so once I started looking at it from that perspective, that helped reshape my priorities and helped encourage me. Like, well, I guess none of this stuff really matters. Like, if I'm not here, like, that's a future me problem, right? Like, I'm worried about things that may not even be issues. And I don't even know if it's going to be an issue unless I try or unless I get there. And then, like, if it is an issue, then I'll deal with it. But, you know, at this point in time, it is irrelevant what could or what might happen if I'm not here to deal with the problem later. So if that's some of the stuff you're dealing with, I encourage you to look at it from that perspective. Appreciate you guys watching these videos. Like the video, please share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Comment in the video what are some other some concerns or hesitations that maybe you've experienced, or even, folks that you know of who've gone through their own experiences. Like, hey, my buddy was having an issue and this is what stopped him or her from getting help. And, maybe that's something we can discuss on the next episode. But, again, appreciate your guys' time. And until the next one, I'll see you guys then.